The men of the Middle Ages were very fond of the number 7. 7 days in the week, 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 holy sacraments in the church, 7 liberal arts in the universities, 7 champions of Christendom, 7 electors of the Holy Roman Empire, 7 cardinal virtues, and so, of course, there had to be 7 deadly or mortal sins. It wouldn't have been symmetrical otherwise. Probably no one today would make just that list. Jesus resolved them all into one: the absence or misdirection of love. On the other hand, we could subdivide until the moral statute book became as bulky as the legal statute book. Dante in his Purgatory followed the traditional 7, but in the Inferno he had a quite different classification: sins of self-indulgence, sins of violence, and sins of fraud, with a great many subdivisions under each head. Duncan Littlefair, a Michigan pastor, in his recent book, Sin Comes of Age, lists his own 7: ignorance, arrogance, greed, violence, dishonesty, indifference, and idolatry. Just as an interesting exercise would be good for you in Lent, I suggest some of you might like to list your own list of sins. They don't have to be 7, but whatever number appeals to you. And similar, when you finish that, you might try and list your 7 of the cardinal virtues, which also 7. Now the 7 of tradition were pride, envy, avarice, sloth, gluttony, anger, lust. 2 things are interesting about that traditional list. One is that no one of them is a sin in itself. All are the motives behind sin, the emotions or ideas which may lead people to sin. For example, you don't find murder, but isn't that largely a result of anger or hatred? You don't find theft, but isn't that connected with a motive of avarice? You don't find blasphemy, but surely that has something to do with pride. And the other point is that each of them could be taken in a narrow context or a very broad one. Take, for example, gluttony. If that merely means eating too much, it is certainly a bad habit, but I would hardly call it a deadly sin. But since temperance is one of the cardinal virtues, I think you can extend gluttony legitimately to include any form of inordinate self-indulgence. It might be at the saloon bar, it might be at the sports arena, it might be at the card table, anything in which you carry out indulgence in some habit or pleasure to an inordinate degree. I shall take the liberty of treating each sin in this broad fashion. I shall be what the lawyers call a loose constructionist. And of course the same remark holds for the cardinal virtues. Thus, for example, charity is not limited to almsgiving, though it certainly includes it. Now, what is sin anyhow? Ever ask yourself that? Many will say disobedience to God. We'll grant that. But God does not command us arbitrarily or unreasonably. There must always be a reason why in His commands and prohibitions. Since God desires the welfare of His creatures, it is reasonable to suppose that all sin involves some actual or potential harm to that welfare. This presupposes a conscious being. If you smash a stone with a hammer, you've committed no sin against the unconscious stone. Although if the stone belongs to somebody, you may have committed a sin against its owner. But if you mistreat a horse, dog, or cat, you have sinned because they are able to suffer. We too are conscious beings. By sloth or intemperance, we could sin against ourselves even on a desert island where it wasn't in our power to injure anybody else. Can we sin against God? But not directly, for God is too high for us to reach. Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost rebelled against God, but found the attempt futile. He therefore took out his malice by trying to ruin Adam and Eve. In like manner, we sin against God every time we sin against each other. Obviously, most sin, therefore, is against other human beings. Now, why do we sin? We desire the 5 P's: property, power, position, pleasure, popularity. Sometimes we think we get those good things at the expense of somebody else. Now, this is an important point. These things are not bad in themselves. They are good. A race which had no desires would be weak, poor, easily conquered, and perhaps die out altogether in the struggle for existence. We are commanded to love others as we love ourselves. If we have no good will for our own welfare, where does that leave the others? But like other good things, this desire for self-advancement may become inordinate. I'd like you to examine that word inordinate. It doesn't mean too much. It means disproportionately. If your love for yourself, which you ought to have, is not balanced by an equal or greater love for others, then you are in danger of sin. Desire for pleasure may become lust or gluttony. Desire for wealth may make you a miser, a thief, or a cheat. Love of position, power, and esteem may end in disdainful pride, or if frustrated in gnawing envy. Take the question of intemperance, for instance. There's a proverb to the effect: first the man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes a man. Not all the 7 are in themselves sinful, but all, without exception, are highly dangerous. Yield your will to any one of them, and you're in a speeding automobile without brakes or steering gear. Since I was granted 4 Sundays to present 7 sins, I've had to group them. But pride can stand proudly alone. According to the theologians, it was the oldest sin, the one by which Satan and his angels fell. Essentially, pride is one form of egoism, the exaltation of self. Like other sins, it is the misuse of something good. Call it self-respect, and a good many people will own to it. Now, self-respect is not possibly the highest motive. When a politician says, It's an insult to offer a bribe to a man like me. You can argue that he might better have appealed to the will of God or love of country or some abstract ethical standard. Still, the fact remains he didn't take that bribe. Even such phrases as noblesse oblige or un-American and the like may help to right conduct, though they show a pathetic ignorance as to how a good many men in high position or our fellow Americans have regrettably misbehaved. But pride has many and obvious dangers. It often leads, for instance, to overestimating oneself, resting on one's laurels of past achievement, and a consequent underestimating the opposition. This has been the ruin of many an artist, many an author, many a political campaign, many a football team, and more than one war. Folly, however, is not quite the same thing as sin. I like the story of the Catholic priest shriving a fair penitent. Father, I've committed a sin. Say on, my daughter. This morning I looked in the mirror and I thought, how beautiful I am. That is the sin of vanity. But daughter, that is not a sin. In your case, it is merely an error. By my own efforts, I'll push the others down and still be number one. Ambition, an active form of pride, grows hungrier by what it eats. The old tale of the fisherman's wife illustrates this. A fisherman caught a fish. It proved to be a magic fish that knew how to talk. And it said, throw me back into the sea and I will grant your wish. Well, that sounded like a fair bargain, so he threw the fish back into the sea. And the fish said, now what do you want? He was thinking of his dirty, tumble-down cottage. And he said, build me a nice, tight, firm cottage. All right, said the fish. He went home and he found it. Now his wife, I'm sorry, this story sounds a little anti-feminist, was not content. After a few days, she said, a cottage is all right, but what you ought to go back for was a palace while you were about it. The fisherman went back, and the fish said, don't ask for too much, but I will grant it this time. And so when he got home, he found a palace. But his wife was still not content. A few days later, she said, that fish will grant anything. Go and ask him to make me queen of the moon. He went to the fish. Fish said, go home and see what you can find. And he went home and he found the original tumble-down hut with which he started. Now, isn't that fable the story of Napoleon, of Hitler, of any number of insatiable would-be world conquerors? In the 3 remaining talks of the series, I shall discuss first the competitive sins, envy and avarice, then the self-indulgent sins, sloth and gluttony, and finally the sins of emotion, anger and lust. 2 sins each Sunday, surely an ample allowance.